This is Bridge Street.
Hopefully no coal in your stocking, Joe.
I hope not.
I don't think so.
Well, coming up today on Bridge Street, we're going to be checking in with Miss America, Nina Davalori, taking a look back at our extended interview that we did with her.
And the power of persuasion. We're going to let you know how a letter writing campaign has paid off for some ESM students. But first,
handling Yuletide stress. We're going to be talking about advice from Michael Heath. And of course, the clock is counting down to the big day. Some last-minute gift ideas.
you know, if you watch Bridge Street with any regularity and you see Michael Heath, you know, he often says at a time of stress and anxiety, you got to take that emotional or mental cigarette. And the holiday times, maybe that time they break out a whole pack of emotional cigarettes. Michael Heath joins us. So why, first of all, if it's a time of joy, a time of happiness, then why are people so just wound so tightly and worked up, stressed?
I think in a nutshell, it's because we lose sight of what's important and we become overwhelmed with anxiety. And I want to share a great story, very short story, to make that point. There were two sisters named Mary and Martha, and they lived together, and they had a very important guest coming over. And while Martha was busy cleaning and making sure that everything was just perfect, she noticed that her sister Mary was just sitting talking with the important guest. Instead of being gracious and happy and joyous, Martha became so overwhelmed that she became angry and said to the guest, "Do you think it's right that I'm left here to do all the work while my lazy sister just sits there?" The important guest, I think you may know by now, was Jesus. And Jesus said, "Martha, you're anxious with many things. Mary's chosen the better portion." And I think that story really encapsulates what happens with holiday times. We just lose sight of what's important because we're so anxious. There's so many pressures to do it right. And we get so worried, what if we don't? And that source of anxiety, I think, I mean, there are many reasons why holidays are stressful, but I think that's a big one.
I know for me, probably the biggest reason why I get stressed around the holidays is buying gifts and spending money and wanting to buy the best gift possible for a family member, but not being able to commit the amount of money that I would like to. For someone who's in that same situation, what could you say to these people?
Well, you've heard this before. You've heard it's the thought that counts. I would say it's the spirit that counts. And sometimes, you know, we suffer from this because we're bombarded by commercials and media constantly, and we can't help but think, you know, it's the amount we spend means the amount we love, and that's just not true. And if it's, frankly, the more personal and the more self-giving that it is, it's a better gift by the relationship, not by what Macy's or whoever's telling you what to buy.
All right, so we have some tips here, just the tips. We have 4 of them. Test your expectations. Are they realistic?
Right, your first expectation is that, as many people have, that it's going to be just a wonderful, perfect occasion. And in fact, life doesn't stop or take time off for holidays. So all the problems you have before the holidays are going to be there. And realize that with the added things of seeing relatives that you haven't seen for a while, maybe you've lost a loved one and there's going to be some extra grief that may be involved, realize that it could be very stressful, and to prepare for that. Don't just get caught off guard.
And that kind of brings us to your second tip, which is think ahead and anticipate difficulties and be specific. What are the worst parts? So would you recommend maybe writing down a list?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes we think of things globally, the holidays, when in fact it might be, what do we do 15 minutes after everybody gets there and there's kind of an awkward period, or, and, you know, whatever it
Serve
might
a drink.
Or 2.
Or 2. And think, and here's the thing, if you can identify it, then you can be creative and say, well, how did I do it in the past that didn't work so well? What could I do differently that might have a different outcome?
Not on your list here, but I want to ask you if we can go maybe to 2B. What about for those who have lost loved ones and they're kind of revisiting a time, maybe it's the first holiday season without their loved one, maybe it's a time when they lost their loved one during the holiday season. How do you navigate those waters?
I would say respect and honor that loved one, but also put a time limit on it. That you can spend some time with maybe remembrance and photographs or videos or whatever memorabilia or artifacts that you have, but also realize that it's a time for the living as well, and so not to become swallowed up in grief or swallowed up in sadness.
Okay.
So another tip that you have is to be creative in handling situations, thinking of different ways to handle the predictable parts and what you can do differently. Do you have any unique ideas of how to handle situations creatively?
Well, first of all, as we said, try something different, but also monitor your stress levels. What is it, radiologists wear the dosimeters, and as you're going through the holiday or maybe the event, notice your own level of stress and don't let it get too high, because once it gets too high, you lose it and things can get ugly, kind of like with Martha. And the other thing would be to don't forget why you're doing this. Don't lose the spirit, don't lose touch with the joy of the holiday.
And lastly, have an emergency plan. Really? I mean, do you, for what? For getting too stressful? I mean, how,
well, let's just go back to Martha for a second. If Martha had realized that her levels had gone over the top, if she had just excused herself for a second and said, excuse me, I need to step aside for a minute, to just sort of hit the reset button and let again, anxiety is what destroys our ability to feel joy and to think clearly. So if she could just calm down just for a few minutes, she could come back into the situation, and I think it would have been a much better situation all the way around.
All right.
You need to give yourself permission to just step aside, or maybe even ask someone to just take over for a second.
And just do those deep breathing exercises. Those help get a lot of us through the holidays, I'm sure.
Michael Heath.
Thank you for joining us.
Have a
this
great
morning.
Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays
well.
to you, too.